Hello, I'm Betty Wong, and this is Emily Smith-Calbick, and we're the co-founders of the Stage 2 Startups Founders Over 40 Unconference. We want to thank you today for joining us for day 3 of our Unconference, which is actually 4 3-hour sessions in October where we focus on different types of business owners. Founders who start their companies based on ideas, founders who buy their businesses, founders who are brandpreneurs or the faces behind your businesses, which can also be solopreneurs, and founders who are social impact entrepreneurs. And then we follow up with providing resources that can provide the listener with programs that will help you to either start or grow your business or nonprofit. But before we start our brandpreneur program today, I just want to make a few announcements and a little bit of a recap for those of you who may not have been with us last week. So first, we want to recognize our advisory board for all their work helping us to put this conference together. Ed Rogoff and Elizabeth Eisel, who participated during week 1, Judy Messina, who moderated our keynote speaker last week and also participated in week 1. Also, we want to thank Carlos Vassallo, Ramon Gill, Stella Lupershore, Jeremy Kagan, Jeff Wright, and Ting Zhang. And we want to mention our sponsors, the AARP Foundation, FranNet, the Global Center for Social Entrepreneurship Network Foundation, and the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Initiative. And we will hear from a representative today. And not the least, we want to thank the very small team that helps to pull this conference off and actually is working hard every day. Leslie Cabrera, Charlotte Tomic, Daniela Viola, Peter Calvick, Leslie Chan, Tony Palladino, and Deborah Albert. So let me share some highlights from last week's program on buying a business. Our keynote speaker was Catherine Rowlands, the publisher of Bay City News in California, who shared that she actually interned at the company she bought and had always wanted to buy her local paper, especially in the current environment where local papers are dying out. So one of Kat's pearls of wisdom was that you have to analyze your personal ability to be open to new opportunities. And that when she was considering buying the Bay City News, she no longer had responsibility for her parents, her children, was single, and therefore able to have the time to focus on the business. Our first panel was moderated by FranNet Atlanta Market President Leslie Cuban, who actually started off as a franchisee. Her 2 panelists were Marianne Cordiano, co-owner of CMIT Solutions of Cleveland, and Jose Jimenez, owner of 2 franchises, Alpha Graphics of Dunwoody and Atlanta Airport. So Marianne said that she never expected to buy a franchise because she didn't want to have to deal with food. But she and her husband found a technology-based franchise. Jose shared that he wanted to own a business, but it took Leslie as a franchise consultant to help him find the right franchise, even though he had lots of information that he found on the internet through Google. Our second panel features Sal Rizzo of Degustibus Cooking School and Richard Russo of Endomedics. So Sal shared that it was his partner who helped him to understand that he could make the jump, while Richard always wanted to buy a business, but when he was initially turned down, he became an employee and had to wait until later in life to become an owner. So Richard's word of advice, make sure you do your due diligence and research the business that you're going to buy. Our moderator for Sal and Richard's talk was actually Chris Farrell, author of Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Your Life. If you've missed these sessions, you can still get the videos. Just email me at betty@stage2startups.org. And now, Emily will introduce us to this week's program with a few words from Goldman.
Thank you, Betty. So welcome to day 3 of the Unconference. For the past 2 weeks, we've been exploring the entrepreneurial paths available to anyone who is considering or has already left their career path to successfully found and grow their own business. We learned that the highest rate of entrepreneurship is among those aged 55 to 64, and that these businesses tend to be the most successful. We explored how entrepreneurs like Tanya Van Coort of Goalsetter, Jean Pinder of Clear Health Costs, James Rousseau of the CoreLink Solution, and Deb Bollinger of the Launch Lab all took an idea and turned that idea into a business. And like Betty said, last week we heard from founders who bought a franchise or business and successfully grew it by building on what someone else started. This week is all about the brandpreneur, the founder who has leveraged the experience and skills they gained from working for someone else to build their own successful company. Their expertise is their unique selling point for their companies. But this can also present unique challenges as they look to transition from startup to established business. We'll be hearing from several founders today about the risks and rewards they face by being the face of their business. But first, we have a brief word via video from Jessica Taylor, National Director of Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. After the video, Sonia Moyne, Senior Director of ICIC, will share a few words about this initiative.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Taylor, National Director of Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. And I'm so excited to be here to share more about the signature Goldman Sachs program. You, small business owners, are absolutely essential to our economy. You have a passion to make a difference, but we know that journey isn't always easy. You may have realized that you need help navigating areas core to your business, like financial management, hiring, and sales. Or maybe you feel alone as a business owner, especially after the last year and a half, and are looking to tap into a like-minded group of entrepreneurs. Well, Goldman Sachs created 10,000 Small Businesses for one simple reason: to help business owners like you grow your business by providing a practical business education at no cost. 10,000 Small Businesses is a 10-week education program focused on business growth. And after 10 weeks, graduates leave with an actionable growth plan to take their business to the next level. And it works. 2/3 of our graduates grow revenues 6 months after finishing the program, and half add employees. We are an amazing community of nearly 12,000 businesses across all 50 states in the U.S. We're excited for you to learn more by visiting 10ksbapply.com. Thank you, Stage to Startups, for setting up today's session, and thank you all for being here. I hope to see you soon.
And now for a few words from Sonia Moyne.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I also want to thank Jessica for sharing the vision of the 10,000 Small Business Program on behalf of the Goldman Sachs Foundation. As Emily mentioned, I'm Sonia Moyne. I'm a Senior Director at ICIC. We are a national nonprofit based in Boston, and we are the outreach and selection partner for the 10,000 Small Business Program. And I just want to say that we're so excited to be part of this Founders Over 40 Unconference. I love the title. And be a resource to you guys as you continue your journey to be an entrepreneur, if you're already a business owner. So we hope you know that there are so many resources and support out there for you to be successful and to scale. As Jessica mentioned, the 10KSB program is a practical hands-on business education program. That means, you are working on your business, not on somebody else's business. And the program is for established businesses. And what does that mean? It means, the business would have been in business for, around 2 years or more, with revenue around $75,000 or more. But honestly, if you're not there yet, I still want to encourage you to check out the program. You can still apply. Tell us your story, because that's what we're interested in more than anything. The hard criteria that you might see on our website, and that website is 10ksbapply.com. I'll actually put it in the chat. And I know Jessica shared a couple of data points, but I want to share my favorite data point from this program. The program alumni of the 10KSB program, we are a tight-knit community. It's a tight-knit community of entrepreneurs who support each other professionally and personally. And my favorite data point is that 86% of our alumni actually do businesses with each other, which helps to increase their revenue and add jobs. And they also represent a broad set of industries. They can be, they range from being cafe owners to dog walkers, to architects, to manufacturers. So, it doesn't matter what your business is. It doesn't matter what industry your business is in. We know that this program works. And as Jessica mentioned again, it is at no cost to you, because we wanted to make sure the program is accessible to all business owners, no matter their background. So I hope you will check us out at 10ksbapply.com. I'll also put in my contact info in the chat. And before I go, I just want to thank Betty and Emily and their entire team for putting this session together today, but also for throughout the entire month of October. What an exciting way to finish up fall and go into the holiday season. So thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. This sounds like a fantastic program, and I encourage everybody today to go check that out. Now we're going to move to our fireside chat with Ashton Applewhite, ageism activist, author, and TED Talk speaker. She will be discussing her evolution to becoming an activist with Richard Eisenberg. As the managing editor of PBS Next Avenue and editor of its Money and Work and Purpose channels, Richard helps people manage their personal finances, find jobs, switch fields, volunteer, and find purpose in their lives. He has also written 2 books, How to Avoid a Midlife Financial Crisis and The Money Book of Personal Finance. With that, I'll turn it over to Richard and Ashton.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you, Betty and Sonia. Thank you all for putting together this terrific Unconference. I think you're all going to be in for a treat as we hear from Ashton Applewhite, brandpreneur extraordinaire, talking about being the founder and chief provocateur, I'd say, of This Chair Rocks and the old school anti-ageism clearinghouse. Ashton calls ageism the last socially acceptable prejudice, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we will save about 15 minutes or so for questions from you. So please put your questions in chat and we will get to as many of them as we can. I first learned about Ashton when my public media website for people 50 plus, Next Avenue, wrote a story about her back in 2013. And we were so impressed by her work, we named her our Influencer in Aging of the Year in 2016. Ashton's been on Forbes's 40 Women to Watch Over 40 list and Salt Magazine's list of the world's 100 most inspiring women. In 2017, she gave the stunning TED Talk, Let's End Ageism, which I really encourage you to watch if you haven't seen it yet. It now has 1,704,105 views, maybe more since this morning, last I checked.
No doubt.
I think that's roughly the amount that Matt Amodio won on Jeopardy recently. And Ashton had published her book, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism in 2019, which I also encourage you to get. She's been doing even more remarkable work lately, sounding the calls about the scourges of ageism and ableism in her writing, speaking, and appearances, just like this one. So let's talk with one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs over 40 that I know. Ashton, you didn't start out as an activist. You wrote the best-selling paperback of 1982, Truly Tasteless Jokes, and you were on the staff of the American
You'd open with that. I was afraid you'd open with that.
Well, sorry, it was in your bio. You were on the staff of the American Museum of Natural History for 17 years as a science writer. Then you started blogging about aging and ageism in 2007. I think you were in your 50s then, and you started speaking about it in 2012. What prompted you to become an activist, and why ageism?
Well, as is probably painfully obvious from that bizarre CV, I always know I'm in trouble when someone wants to see my CV. I'm like, if you're counting on my CV to get me the job, I'm not the person for it. My career has just evolved as it's evolved, with God knows, without any sense of where the next thing was going to take me. I never dreamt of being a writer. I certainly never dreamt of being a public figure. I still don't. I don't really see myself that way. But that's how it happened. And of course, in hindsight, as I'm sure your penetrating questions will get to, there was more thought to it than more preconception than I saw at the time. I mean, I started writing about age and aging because I was afraid of getting old. And I learned, being a nerdy, thinky person, within a matter of months, if not weeks, the data points that I started my TED Talk out with 10 years later. It was just so much of what I thought I knew was way off base or flat out wrong. And I guess I just sort of got riled because that's my nature. I got really curious about why so few people know these things. And I started thinking about who benefited from these negative messages and this fear mongering about ageism, about aging. And then I got riled, and I guess that's what turned me into an activist.
Why do you think when you started doing this, so few people were doing what you're doing and what you've been doing?
Uh, I think it's really hard. I think there's no path. I mean, I suppose there isn't for anything. There probably isn't for anyone, trying to put an idea or a new product out there. So there never is a path. I am very sort of dogged by nature. I think, and this is certainly not an original thought, but I think there's three components to whatever success means in our crazy world today. You have to have some skill or talent or a good idea. You need luck and you need persistence. And I think the persistence part of it came to me naturally, but there is this just massive sort of almost absurd cultural aversion to acknowledging the fact that we all wake up a day older, and to get people over that hump is difficult. But to me, that's part of the fun, because these are new ideas for people. I mean, sometimes I describe it like cleaning a really dirty window. It's really dirty, we have a long way to go, but boy, you can see where you've been. And people, smack their heads and say, why didn't I think of that? And that's exciting to me, because then I know I've let a genie out of that particular bottle and it's not going to get back in.
You talked a second ago about perseverance, and I think I read that your mother was an activist for political causes. Did that help inspire what you're doing, do you think?
Yeah, it did. I mean, my mom was I grew up in Washington, D.C., and remember, I guess the earliest marches I went to were the anti-Vietnam, the huge march on the Mall. I remember being very impressioned by that. She worked for Common Cause. That I think that was her only job in the field, but she was always out there, with her work and her words, marching or speaking about civil rights and anti-Vietnam stuff in particular. So I guess I came by her example and I admired that in her and certainly wanted to emulate it.
Now, I know you've called ageism the perfect target for collective advocacy. Why is that the case?
Well, the obvious reason is that everyone is aging. So it is truly the one form of bias that every human being encounters, because we encounter it when we're young as well. The judgment that you're too young to know what you're doing is also ageism, although older people bear the brunt of it because we live in a youth-obsessed society. I have come, as with so many other things I said a while ago, to understand it better, sometimes to rethink it. Like, I actually don't say anymore that ageism is the last acceptable prejudice, because especially in the wake of the pandemic, and Black Lives Matter, it has become apparent how many kinds of prejudice we continue to tolerate. But that speaks to the collective advocacy piece of it. When we know from this idea of intersectionality, which is a clunky word that came out of Black feminist scholarship in the 70s, that every form of prejudice compounds and reinforces each other, that the issues faced by a Black woman are different from the ones a white woman faces trying to make her way in the world. And, if you're disabled, that's another layer on, and so on. Activism is intersectional too. When we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie any form of prejudice, because they're all ignorant for sure, we chip away at what holds them all up, because they all sustain each other and they all are dependent on their systems that support and reinforce each other. So we can't, I mean, both the thrilling and the daunting fact is we're not going to get rid of ageism unless we address racism too, unless we address sexism, unless we address ableism, prejudice against people with disabilities, because a lot of what we think of as ageism is actually apprehension about how our minds and bodies might change, and that's actually ableism.
Well, that was actually the next question I was going to ask. For those in our audience who aren't familiar with that term, can you explain what ableism means and why you're so passionate about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, all these were new. I was going to say that was a new idea to me. All of these were new ideas to me. So let me just say, if you're starting out wondering, if you're not sure what you're doing, believe me, I started completely from scratch. And even I got a lesson even when the invitation came from Betty to be part of this panel, my first thing was like, I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about being an entrepreneur. I know more than I think I do. And so do you, so do we all, so I think that's a tendency, especially I see it a bit in gender terms. I think women are so ready to sell ourselves short or to think that we need to know everything about a topic in order to address some topic of it. So I didn't know anything about ableism to start with, which is coming to any kind of judgment about someone on the basis of how you think their minds or bodies work, just like ageism is the same thing, a preconception on the basis of how old you think someone is. And as I mentioned, so much of our fear and apprehension about aging is actually about whether our minds will continue to work the way they do now, whether our bodies will. And 2 points of that, your body is not going to work the way it did. I mean, I'm wearing a sling because I just happen to have had shoulder replacement surgery because my shoulder doesn't work like it used to. And I'm lucky enough to be able to afford to have some guys go in there and put in some new hardware. Nothing stays the same. But if we don't, and it's tricky because aging is not the same as physical decline. It's really important to resist that equation, which is deeply ableist, but it's also important to acknowledge that we age well by adapting to these changes. Cognitive decline is not inevitable. Some part of your body is going to fall apart though. And when so much of the dominant sort of positive aging, successful aging narrative is that we do it well to the degree to which we continue to move and look like younger versions of ourselves. And that is delusory. It's expensive. It sets us up to fail, and it's hugely classist. It gives a huge advantage to people who can purchase all these supposed, remedies or fixes to stop the clock, which we can't, and which is a kind of a punishing and misguided thing to aspire to.
So let's talk about entrepreneurship. I guess I'll start. I'll start broadly and just ask you, aside from the themes that you want to focus on, are you an entrepreneur partly because you want to stay engaged in content that matters? Or tell me a little bit about why you chose this route, because you could have done you might have been able to do some of what you've been doing in other ways rather than starting your own business to do it.
Yeah. Well, I backed into everything. I think you mentioned the joke books. I was lucky enough to make a bunch of money in my late 20s and early 30s, which is not the usual time most of us make a bunch of money. It afforded me a couple of really important things. It enabled me to educate my children. It enabled me to choose how much time I was able to spend with them when they were little, which was a huge luxury. And honestly, it enabled me to afford a divorce. And so, he got half the assets. It was okay with me. And I went out on my own. I anticipated, one of the few things my ex-husband was right about was that he said, you're never going to go back to a full-time job. When we met, I was an editorial assistant. I went to work in publishing because I hadn't figured out anything else to do. And I had backpacked around the world and been a hippie. And it was like nothing had revealed itself to me. So I took a job in publishing because I like to read. So that is as much of a career plan as I have ever had. But the fact is that I liked having my schedule be free, and going through a divorce was a catalyst for writing my first serious book, which is called Cutting Loose: Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well. And in the process of writing it, I became a writer. And from that point on, with writing all kinds of like dopey stuff, I wrote for incredibly geeky science museums. I wrote for advertising agencies, anyone that would pay me to write, because, we'd blown through the joke money living off it for, the decade that I was married. No regrets. And then I think I just got used to being my own boss. And I was just, here's my brilliant business plan: make more than you spend. That's pretty much it.
And how would you describe your entrepreneurial journey? How much of it has been planned out? How much of it has been surprising to you? Did it change because the world changed or because your ideas changed? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling that your perspective on that is probably as or more accurate than mine. But I was lucky enough to get a fantastic job here in New York at the Museum of Natural History, which is just a fantastic institution. I was lucky because, once again, I knew nothing about science. I mean, the last science course I had taken was the mandatory one science class in college. And so it was an unbelievable education for me because I wrote for the education department about everything from astrophysics to otters. And it was a 21-hour-a-week job with healthcare. So that enabled me to start this blog. I mean, it started as a blog. In the beginning, I was like, oh, I'll be a modern writer. That was, I guess, content provider, repulsive phrase. I'll tweet and I'll blog and I'll never have to write another book. I definitely didn't want to go through that again. And I remember begging that someone would ask me to talk for free at a pet shelter, at anywhere, just that I wouldn't. So it did take a lot of, I've discovered this thing. It seems really important. I hope I want to, tell you what I have to say. And the job at the museum supported me and I gradually began to get little tiny speaking gigs. I'm incredibly grateful to a couple of early supporters. And then I have to say the TED Talk was a huge break because it got me a speakers bureau that started charging real money for my talks. And the talk was in the spring of the year that I turned 65. So it all sort of came together that I could afford to quit my job at the museum, get on Medicare, and start earning enough from my speaking and I wrote a book in there, didn't I? Yeah, I wrote a book because it just became obvious I had to write a book. That was another journey. You want to hear about that?
Sure.
Some people write easily and seem to turn out amazing books every 2 years. I'm so far on every 22-year track. It's really hard to write a book, but when you do write one, it does change things. I didn't get the kind of interest from it. I've been published by all the big publishers, and no one was interested in the way that I thought the book deserved, including the book that had an option. The publisher that had an option, the editor said, "We're concerned that no one else is writing about this." And I was like, I thought you were in the idea business. But anyway, so I ended up self-publishing, which I have to say my partner knows a lot about electronic publishing, and he really helped. I could not have done anywhere near as good a job without him. But the minute we put this self-published book out in the world, it did change things. It gave me more gravitas or confidence or something. And then 2 years later, I ended up selling it to a new division of Macmillan called Celadon. So, I guess that's about perseverance. So they're doing great with it. I said it'll be a backlist book. From working in, backlist books are the classics that you don't have to spend money on promoting, but they keep selling. And I do think the book will become, a standard text in the future. I hope that doesn't sound hubristic.
It also sounds to me as though what you're telling our audience is the idea of multiple streams of income, which is that, you get some money from the book and then you give speaking engagements and that sort of thing. So do you want to talk about that idea?
Yeah, that I left out one other thing, which is that because I made money early on, I was able to buy a house, a loft in New York. So I got my foothold in the New York real estate market. And I guess, my partner says I'm lucky in that I am always just a little bit ahead of the culture. So it's not like I went out, and invented ageism or discovered the Upper West Side. But I have bought 3 different places to live, and each has appreciated. And the third one that I bought has a back apartment. So I also had rental income. And the museum salary was a steady base. I think without that, I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to start your own business. Nothing I did required any capital. I had to provide for myself and my kids up to a point, but then they became self-supporting. And but it definitely helps to have multiple streams. I'm sure for the same reason that it helps to diversify, your investments, just not to have all your eggs in one basket.
Right. And by the way, how did you get the TED Talk? How did that happen?
A friend of mine sent me a thing on Facebook saying TED is soliciting speakers for this. What did they call it? An ideas innovation event, or some dopey name that sounded like a used car sales. And so I applied. And they do once a year here in New York, have sort of, it's not quite an open mic. They pretend it's not a competition. It's a competition and then one person from that gets to go to Vancouver a couple of months later. So that's how I got it.
So let me skip ahead a little bit. No successful entrepreneur can do it alone. And you created what you call old school with two people in their 30s. What would you like our audience to know about the idea of multi-generational entrepreneurship and about working with others to build a business?
I take comfort in the fact I love having these two colleagues because they are fantastic. I have always worked alone. I am a crank. It's one thing I like about writing. I can't imagine putting something together that requires managing a big team. But I had met, their names are Kyrie Carpenter and Ryan Backer. I met them separately. I had this idea like, imagine if the women's movement had a central repository of the really great books and the really great slideshows and the really great workshops. And this movement, God knows, is just getting off the ground. So let's create one. I asked Kyrie if she was interested. She said, sure. We were sitting on a curb in Berkeley, where she lives. And then she was a few weeks later, she said, this is really not a one-person job. And I had met Ryan, who is a gerontologist and age activist on the East Coast at the time. And they called each other and said, famously in our little universe, did Ashton give you like any suggestions about like how this should go forward or what? No, but call it luck, call it intuition. We are a terrific team. I love that they are younger because it surprises people that young people are interested in ageism, although it shouldn't. And I like the thought that when I kick the bucket, depending on whether old school is still, ongoing, but it is, I love the thought, that I hope it'll still be going, and I'm pretty sure that they'll want to carry it forward. So, but I would say that that is maybe the only reason to select a partner on the basis of age alone. In the universe that I want to inhabit, almost paradoxically, age will be way, way less important than we give it credit for. Whether you have a good team depends on shared goals and shared values. And whether somebody, the magic thing about, sorry, that's an annoying thing to say, but the wonderful thing about our team is that when there's a job that neither of one of us wants to do, one of the three of us usually steps up and do it. I will say that because it was my idea, I usually get to be the one to say, nope, you two duke it out. But each of us steps up to make sure the thing gets done and to talk it over if there's a problem. I don't think that's a function of age. I think that's a function of our temperaments and our abilities and the commitment that we each bring to the job. Does that sound like I'm weaseling out of the answer?
No, I think that's a good answer. And one of the things that suggested, you mentioned the Curie was in Berkeley, I think. People, I think in the past would have thought, well, if you're going to start a business, even if you have people working with you, for you, you're all going to be doing it together, either in a storefront or even in somebody's home and all sitting around a table. You've been doing this remotely. It seems to me that was, clearly the pandemic has made that more necessary for a lot of people. But do you want to talk a little bit about the idea that as an entrepreneur today, you don't necessarily need to be working with other people in the same place?
Sure. Yeah. We were virtual way before it was on trend. Ryan at the time was living in Europe, and then they since moved to Montreal, and Kyrie lives in San Francisco, and I'm based in New York. So we worked together for almost a full year before we came together physically in August to announce the launch of Old School, I guess 3 years ago now. And that was the first time we had been together. And then, so it was wonderful to meet each other. But I have to say that one of the, it's hard to say a blessing of the pandemic, but it has legitimized the virtual, right? It no longer seems like a sad sack second cousin. I mean, one of our many goals for Old School is and continues to be to host, we now call them convenings of age advocates, so we can meet each other and support each other. We can do that now for free, whereas otherwise it would have been something to, to plan when we could get a foundation to back it or whatever. We're now growing it. We're seeking funding. One of the hard things for me to do, and I don't know if it's just me, is ask for money. But I'm about to, do so on behalf of anyone who wants to support this nonprofit, because I think we do great work. So, you do have to do stuff you don't like to do. But it's easier to do it if you have an idea or a product or a service that seems to have real value. And that makes it easier for me. It's like I'm sort of a conduit for it, if that makes sense.
Sorry about my dog. You brought up financing. So let me ask you a little bit about how you financed your business over the years. It sounds like some of it came from maybe real estate, some maybe from book proceeds, but then you've been getting some grants. You got a pretty big grant a few years ago, maybe last year, for the Old School, right?
Yeah, I financed Old School originally myself. I donated my time. I do continue to donate my time, and Ryan and Kyrie worked for a pittance. And then 3 years ago, I'm not at liberty to give their name, but a private philanthropist whom I had met through TED had offered sort of to be a business ear to whisper in. I remember right after TED, 50 people were saying, you should start a nonprofit, you should start a foundation. And she said, do you want to run an organization? And I said, no. And she said, then don't do it. So that was really good advice. And I came to them with, I was told to do a one-pager for funding and send it to them, didn't hear. And I wrote like this note saying, I know this isn't what you do, but do you have any advice on, is it professional, whatever? She was like, I hate the name, how much are you looking for? Be more professional. So I told her, and they gave us a $250,000 grant over 3 years. So that's enough to get us going, but now it is time to enter the real world of soliciting monies. I want to, it seems to me, and I guess I will also say for the benefit of the group, that it is a blessing, a curse and a blessing to be ignorant in a way, to not have preconceptions. It seems to me, and my instincts have been pretty damn good, although I may kick myself for saying this in public 6 months from now, that there are a lot of foundations doing really, really interesting social justice work, and no one is doing it around ageism. There are a certain number of small funds in what I call old land, but everyone is chasing those same organizations. And ageism, especially in the context of population aging, which is a permanent global demographic trend. If the World Health Organization can get on it, it's not the World Old People Organization, then it seems to me foundations that are interested in social justice and addressing inequality at a fundamental level need to get on the ageism boat as well. Sorry about getting up on my high horse there, but.
Well, no, it's a great point. And I wondered why you think that is. I think I read somewhere that only 1% of philanthropy goes to anything related to aging in any way, which seems ridiculously low to me. And I wonder, given the fact that, it's such a big issue and there's so many tentacles to it, and as you say, we're all aging, why do you think these foundations aren't, seeing this as a place to be putting their money?
Because of ageism. Because of this pervasive sense that, that money spent on people in the second half of life is somehow less important, less legitimate, less valuable than money spent on people in the first half. And if you think about that from a fundamental ethical point of view, we know it is not ethical or typically legal to allocate resources by race or by sex. And why should it be any more acceptable to allocate resources by age, especially when, you're at the whole point of, of this wonderful startups conference is to see all the skills, all the capacity, and all the need that people in the, people who are no longer young, that's most of us, that's 2/3 of humanity, deserve and have so much to give, contribute, etc. So I really think it's just a question of hammering away on age-based reasoning, or another way to come at it is the omission of older people. I for now have learned, to recognize, is everyone in the room white? Is everyone in the room male? Is everyone in the room young? Is everyone in the room old? Because that too is a form of discrimination, conscious or not, that really hampers us as human beings, and certainly us as entrepreneurs, for being our most effective in the world.
I think it's a great point. And I would say at Next Avenue, we've been working really hard, especially recently, in making sure that our stories are more diverse, both in terms of the experts we quote, the people that we quote, the writers that we have. But you need to be intentional about it. And I'd like to see more organizations doing that. So as our audience has seen so far, you're brutally frank and candid. So I want to ask you to be honest with us all about some of the mistakes that you've made along the way. What would you wish you might have done differently as an entrepreneur that our audience could learn from, so maybe they don't make those mistakes?
I think I've been pretty lucky as an entrepreneur, but I also have to acknowledge that I came at it from a position of security and privilege to start with. I have supported myself since the day I graduated from college, but my parents paid for college. I didn't have any debt. So, I am where I am in large part because of the privilege I started out with. I have taken risks. When you mention mistakes, I just posted a blog post yesterday about the mistake I feel the worst about lately, which has to do with being really good at talking the talk about exactly what you're talking about doing Next Avenue, about engaging a more diverse group of people, because I don't want the movement against ageism to be just a bunch of middle-class white women like me, and then hosting a meeting that was almost entirely attended by middle-class white women like me, and almost not noticing. I kind of did, till a couple of people of color called me out on it. And just to be this blind to my own white privilege was like, oof, So I think that's the hardest thing for me. And I'm sure I could do a million things better. I'm sure I could learn that I should tweet on Tuesdays at 2 and optimize my social media presence and figure out whether my newsletter should come out once a month or once whatever, and have a blue background or a gray background. And I just don't have the bandwidth to do any of that. But I also don't have the bandwidth to go figure out how much I'm losing by not doing it better. So I don't think about that much.
What about pricing your value? One of the people in the chat said that that's been a challenge for her. Is that something that you struggle with at all?
My little note, my super professional notes that I wrote when we were thinking, is a little triangle: ask for money. It's really hard to ask for money. It's hard for me. I don't know whether that's cultural or what. I think it is possibly a little bit gendered, although if everyone disagrees with me, I apologize if that is a sexist thing to say. It's really important to ask for money. It's really important, especially if you're a woman, and it's really important to offer people money, even if it is a small sum, especially if they are women, especially if they are people of color, and so on down the chain of marginalization, because those groups have less access to work and are traditionally less well paid. So it's incumbent on us. What I've been trying to do is to use my position to ask, if I'm asked to be on a panel or something, okay, but are you talking about racism, or do you have people of color, or is someone with disability on the panel? But that's different from asking for money. Ask, and ask for more than you think you're worth. because you are worth more than you think you are. And also because people value what they pay for. And even if they can't pay you, they will appreciate that the mere ask will bump you up. And also sometimes there are ways that you can be paid, for example, a book buy or a promotion of some sort, where if they can't afford cash in their budget, they can afford to put your work or your ideas forward in some way if they and you are creative about the ask.
So we've got some great questions coming in chat. I'm going to get to more of them in a minute. I've got a couple more of my own, and then, but I'll encourage people to send questions now while we still have a few minutes left. Ashton, what do you find most fulfilling about being an entrepreneur?
Well, what I do, at the risk of sounding pretentious, this work seems really important to me. And that is a good reason to get up in the morning, although mornings are never my strong point. And usually when I wake up in the morning, everything seems really hard and daunting. And then I feel better after the first cup of coffee, and have to remind myself, even at 69, it's like, oh, remember, it's early morning. You're going to feel better about this an hour from now. So I do really like the fact that my work is meaningful to me. But that reminds me of something else that might be useful for our listeners to hear, which is that I hate the exhortation to like find your passion or find your purpose. I could never decide what to major in college in, what to be when I grew up, any of these things. Aging turned out to be the perfect fit for me because it involves everything. Every aspect of personal growth, of finances, of psychology, of political science, of biology. Your purpose, though, does not have to be to change the world or help catalyze a movement. It can be writ really small. So I remember it took me a long time to find my way. It started as a blog. I mean, I left over some, and then there was a couple of years when I floundered. And, being told to find my purpose, I just wanted to go hunt those people down and hit them with a, 2x4. It takes time, and it's incremental, and it's really fine if that purpose is very, very small. If it's just to kick the ball down the road 2 feet, or ship one thing, or write one paragraph, that is good enough.
I can tell that there are quite a few people who are watching you now who want to be helpful in doing the sort of thing that you're doing, not necessarily starting a business to do it, but they want to combat ageism. So what would you tell our audience of founders and aspiring founders over 40 about things they could be doing to combat ageism, either in their own lives or maybe starting a business or nonprofit?
Well, I have a whole post, which I will make sure to give to the organizers, which is 10 things you can do to help combat ageism. I could talk about that, needless to say, for an hour and a half, and I won't. But thank you for the question. And if you go to my website, which is thischairrocks.com, at the bottom is how to contact me. Write me and ask. I'll love that question. So there's always that, and I'll see if I can post that in the chat. I think it's thischairrocks.com/contact. When you are starting an organization, there's a famous experiment from, I don't know what city it was or what orchestra, but orchestras are, shocker, mostly male and mostly white. And in an effort to counter that, they started holding auditions behind a partition.
Blind auditions.
Right. And then I heard that they put a carpet down so you couldn't tell what kind of shoes people were wearing. And surprise, the audience, the orchestras diversified. They became less white, less male. People who were not thin, who were not blonde, who were not elegant, got hired because they could play music. What is the equivalent in your hiring process of that platform, that partition, right? How we are all biased. This horrible phrase, culture fit, which you hear from bro culture in Silicon Valley, would translate it as, who would you like to have lunch with? Most of us would like to have lunch with people like us. That's why my group is still mostly people like me, because that's the easiest people for me to reach. We need to try harder. So just make sure that you are not, and there's 5,000 websites on how to, how to diversify your workforce, or how to manage a mixed age workforce. Examine your own biases as best you can. Strip age away, cover up the age, cover up, the accomplishments on the resume. I mean, it makes me crazy that people feel they have to, gray wash their resumes. But what would that person look like? Or make an analogy to a dating site, right? If you didn't know what they looked like, and if you didn't know how old they were, what do they bring to the table? What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? What skills do they have? And so on. And try to be mindful of your biases and to look beyond them.
One question we got in chat was about barriers that you might have encountered in what you've been doing. Can you talk a little bit about any barriers you faced? And one says, has sexism been a barrier in your attempt to take down ageism?
I don't have a great answer to that because I'm not terribly observant about those things. I think it's partly because of my own privilege. I've been able to make enough money and chart my own path that I haven't been stopped cold. There wasn't, there wasn't some opportunity. I mean, I didn't have a path. And I've sure gotten farther than I ever thought I would. So I'm sure there have been cases where my age or my appearance or my big fat outspoken mouth or my fairly radical politics have gotten in the way, but I'm not very good at picking up on that. And also it doesn't seem to me to be a good thing to worry about because I'm just barging on ahead.
There's a question just came in. Can you recommend places or organizations that support people who are going through changes in the second half of their lives? Any you want to recommend, or maybe there's some resources on Old School to point them to?
Well, I do want to recommend Old School, which is oldschool.info, with the clarifier that it is resources expressly devoted to ageism in itself. A lot of that is about ageism in the workplace. It's about ageism in our language. It's workshops about how to address it in ourselves. So noodle around. Everything on Old School is free except the books. And I think you will find, I know you'll find stuff on there that helps explain how you might see yourself as an older person in society and how and why the world sees you as an older person in society. And when we are more aware of those forces, when we see that we are aged, we age in culture, and that the culture in which we age and the businesses we work in and the nature of our aspirations are all informed by age, we are better informed to put that in context and to both leverage it and to push back against it when it's used against us.
So you've been doing this sort of thing for now over a dozen years. Do you feel that the attitudes about ageism in the country and around the world are changing? And also, what about attitudes towards entrepreneurship and midlife second act entrepreneurship?
I definitely think that attitudes are changing. And I think I'm a big picture person. I'm coming at it from the level of fundamental culture change. An analogy would be the women's movement. If we don't address sexism, then women are not going to have an equal crack at opportunity in any arena. If we don't address ageism, older people are not going to be able to hold on to their jobs or start their companies or avoid prejudice in healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as the culture changes, so do opportunities for older people. There was a lot of chatter, and Next Avenue published a piece I wrote on this subject about how the pandemic was making ageism worse. I don't think the pandemic made it worse any more than it made racism worse. It exposed these levels of prejudice. It brought age and aging out of the corners into the middle of the room and exposed the structural prejudice that has been there all along. I am thrilled to bits that the World Health Organization launched a fantastic, it's global campaign to combat ageism. That's the name of it, not the name of it in my fantasies. I just this week came across a call for papers from the Journal of the American Medical Association, open call for papers in partnership with the World Health Organization, acknowledging that aging and ageism were huge barriers to health. These are hard science, people. For them to acknowledge that something as squishy and socially based as ageism is a huge barrier to health is huge. So I really do see things changing, and I'm excited about it.
Great. We have just about a minute or two left. Let me just ask you, this is all about brandpreneurs. So as the face of your company, your nonprofit, how has being the face, Ashton Applewhite, helped the company grow? Has it in any way hindered your company's growth in any way? Do you find that, being out there is something that brandpreneurs, people over 40 starting businesses need to do, or is it only for certain types of people, certain types of businesses?
I am not a business or brand expert, so all I have to offer on that is my intuition. But they say if people learn things through data points, ageism would be a thing of the past. We learn through stories, we learn through relating to individuals, and we, to whom we can relate. So I think, it doesn't hurt that I am an articulate and somewhat charismatic person, that people, that there is a face. That said, it's easier for me to be a face because I don't see it as the face of Ashton Applewhite. I see it as the face, a face, not the face, God forbid, of a movement, of an idea. So it's a little easier for me to hide behind that, if you will. But I think absolutely, we know from social media, hello, Instagram, hello, that if you can attach a story and talk about your own journey, how you got where you did, it is a way absolutely to build relationships with your customers and your clients. And I think that has real value.
Great. And before I turn this over back to Emily and Betty, any parting words, anything we haven't talked about you want to be sure to mention?
We did ask for money. I even asked for money for Old School. So that's a win for me. I did that. If you're a foundation and you want to support our fantastic work, get in touch. Thank you for this opportunity, Richard. I know you're busy and I appreciate it. And, for everyone out there that is having trouble seeing themselves in the world this way, for what it's worth, I still do. And, it's been, and I think that's a part of it. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean you can't get there. It's iterative. And for God knows, from every failure, you learn more than you do from the successes.
Well, that is certainly true. Well, thank you so much, Ashton. And